Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Extreme Desert Run as things have finally calmed down a bit for our colonist Steak. In the last episode we completed our first research project, we built Steak a proper bed, and we have lots and lots of kibble to feed on, so we are ready to make some progress in today's episode. Our first event is also right around the corner, as several chunks of spacecraft fall down not too far away from our small base, so when we have time we will deconstruct those for steel and components. Steak's day, however, begins pretty late with a cloud watching session, before he then starts harvesting most of his rice plants. That takes him a few hours, so we skip ahead to the evening, where Steak consumes another serving of kibble, and unfortunately gets food poisoning. Now, food poisoning is pretty annoying, but thankfully not for too long, as it also goes away on its own. But for about 24 hours, Steak will suffer from pain, slowed down movement and eating speed, and frequent vomiting. The illness starts off minor, then progresses towards more serious symptoms, and eventually dies down again, but all in all, it should hopefully not cause us too much trouble. Now, Steak has spent quite a few hours here re-sowing his rice plants. Now it's time for one more meal, consumed extremely slowly, and then he can go to bed. Just as he lies down, we also have visitors arrive in the desert, but once again they're just passing by, so we won't pay them any mind. Steak then gets up, again fairly late in the day, and he continues sowing out the remaining plants. We can also see his food poisoning has already entered the recovery phase, so the worst is already behind him, and I see no reason not to continue eating kibble for the foreseeable future. After all, the risk of getting food poisoning is very slim. With the base cleaned of vomit, Steak can now also continue researching. We are still trying to unlock stone cutting, and then in the evening, while he is relaxing a bit underneath the stars, a merchant caravan arrives. They are led by a shaman merchant, so they won't be offering any technological marvels, but perhaps they still have a few interesting pieces for sale. Steak's food poisoning has officially vanished, by the way, so he can make the trade without any negative effects impacting him. Alright, sadly the merchant doesn't really have much that we need, so we'll only sell our components and purchase one dose of herbal medicine. This makes us a decent profit of around 100 silver, and stocking up on medical supplies is, at least in my experience, never a bad idea. While Steak is carrying his new supplies back inside, we also have a solar flare strike the desert, but with no electrical devices to be affected, we are not really noticing any changes. The early morning hours are then spent researching. We can see Steak's intellectual skill is rising pretty quickly, and it is already one of his most advanced abilities. Once again, we are also not stealing any food from our visitors, and so the day passes by without any more interruptions. The solar flare ends a little later in the morning. Steak takes a quick nap around noon, and then continues researching throughout the afternoon. After sunset, while Steak is playing a round of hoopstone, we are then notified of a crashed escape pod, so let's see who's inside. Stepan here is a gatherer and very skilled with plants. He is also nimble and can dodge melee attacks more easily, and thanks to his good memory he doesn't lose skill progress as quickly as others. On the flip side, he has creepy breathing, which doesn't necessarily make him the most desirable companion, and his injuries are actually pretty serious, as he's going to die in just a few hours. Still, we are launching a rescue mission here. A dedicated farmer would be a huge help at this point in the game, so let's see if our generosity can convince him to stay. As always, we're putting down a medical sleeping spot, which then allows Steak to treat the poor guy right where he crashed, and considering the speed at which he's bleeding out, that is the only option if we want to save him. Since time is of the essence, we can also not afford to use any medicine for this. Our first priority is simply to stop the bleeding and to make sure our patient survives. Once all the wounds are patched up and Stepan is stabilized, we can relocate his sleeping spot to the inside of our small base, and then send Steak off to bed while our guest is recovering. On the next morning, we can first watch Steak grab breakfast for himself before he feeds a serving of kibble to his patient. At this point, I think we can spare the extra food, even if it's not guaranteed to result in a new colonist. And yes, we could of course always change our approach and capture any colonists that we potentially want to recruit, but at least for now I feel like Steak has actually been able to maintain a fairly kind nature, considering his circumstances of course, and such an approach strikes me as a bit more forceful than currently necessary. In short, the war crimes will have to wait for a while longer. For now, we are trying to solve things with kindness and compassion whenever possible. Speaking of solving things, in the late afternoon, Steak successfully finishes his research of stone cutting, while in the background we have yet another escape pod crash happening. Let's take a look at the research first though. We can see here that we now have a wide array of options for stone-based floor tiles available, and we can also construct the Stonecutter's Table, which will be an essential tool for many of our construction projects going forward. Now let's also take a look at the crashed survivor, who is actually already a member of a faction, but as far as I know there is still a chance of him joining us regardless, and looking at his stats, that would be pretty nice. The volatile trait is not ideal as it causes a high risk of mental breakdowns, but apart from that, Flebe here looks pretty promising, so let's launch another rescue mission. Thankfully, the crash site is not too far away from our base this time, so Steak arrives quickly and can bandage the wounds. The injuries are numerous though, so the tending process takes a few hours, and in the meantime we can see that our first guest is already good to go again. He has also decided not to join us, which is a shame, but who knows, maybe we have his replacement already lined up. Once our patient is stable, we can transfer him into the safety of our base as well, and then give Steak some much needed rest. In the morning, we are showing ourselves extra generous by feeding our already healed patient, who we can then kick out by simply removing his sleeping spot. Afterwards, it's time to harvest the potatoes, a job that takes Steak until noon to finish. His plant skill is thanking him for the experience though, as we are rapidly progressing towards level 6, the point at which we can plant cacti and finally start our own wood production. For now though, we have to be content with new potato plants. With his fields restocked, Steak can now also take care of those chunks of spaceship that dropped at the beginning of the episode, not only because he has nothing better to do, but because we actually need a good amount of steel to build the Stonecutter's Table, and with the ship chunks also providing components, this is a lot more convenient than mining. And Steak pushes through into the late evening, but eventually he is rewarded with 34 components and 120 units of steel, enough for what we need. The construction project has to wait until the next day though, it is getting late and Steak needs his sleep. After feeding his patient, Steak then carries the steel back to the base. We now have just under 150 units, and before we start using it, we'll let Steak fill his recreation meter and also give him a bite to eat. Then it's time to spend 105 units of steel to construct a Stonecutter's Table, which will then allow us to cut big chunks of rock, like the ones sitting just below in the stockpile, into much more manageable stone blocks that can be used for buildings, art or furniture. And while we're here, let's actually start with the 2 limestone chunks we already have sitting around. We'll make sure that Steak only uses stones within reach and doesn't travel halfway across the map for them, and then he can start chipping away. Shortly after, we now have 40 units of limestone in storage, and with the evening still being young and our storage room slowly filling up to capacity, we can mine out a few more stone blocks for Steak to work with. Unfortunately though, he only receives a single block of limestone for his efforts. The remaining tiles were mined out without dropping anything. Well, at least we increased the size of our storage room a bit, that is worth something I guess, and that's also all for this day, so after a quick meal for himself and his patient, Steak can go to bed. On the next morning then, it is time for more rice harvesting. Not a crazy task, since most of the plants have not yet fully matured, so after a few moments of field work, Steak can take care of that one precious stone chunk we mined out on the day before. Afterwards, he can also haul in a few from just outside the base. With our storage room sufficiently expanded, that seems like the more efficient way to obtain more. After another meal, Steak can then also already cut those chunks into stone blocks, which takes a bit of time, but in the end increases our limestone supplies to well over 100 units, enough for another small building, for example, should a certain someone decide to join us. For the time being, however, both Steak and his patient can get some rest. In Steak's case, though, not for long. During my nightly scan of the map, I noticed a small group of dromedaries at the southern edge of our small desert realm, and since dromedaries are pretty much incapable of actually fighting back once attacked, this now calls for a hunting trip. So, with his belly full of kibble, Steak ventures out, bolt-action rifle at the ready. Let's see what he can do here. Or, more accurately, let's see how long it takes him to kill all 4 animals, because again, dromedaries have a 0% chance of attacking when they're harmed, so we can pretty much blast bullets into them for as long as we need. And since that is not the most exciting of activities, we can speed the whole process up a bit. Notice how Steak apparently landed a clean one-shot kill on an animal that he wasn't even aiming for here. And after a few more in-game hours have passed and Steak has gained a bit more shooting experience, all 4 dromedaries are finally down. They are not all dead though, and I want to use this opportunity to address a comment that has popped up from time to time, basically whenever there's animal hunting featured in an episode. Yes, I am aware that you can also kill animals by euthanizing them, which will give the colonist performing this operation a small amount of medical experience. This can be done using a simple animal sleeping spot, but the reason we're not constantly doing this to farm skill points is that it costs 1 unit of medicine each time you want to perform this operation. Whether or not that seems plausible or necessary is beside the point, but I prefer to keep medicine for medical emergencies, at least until we have a lot more than the combined 4 doses we currently possess. So we'll kill these animals the old-fashioned way by simply marking them to be hunted and letting Steak take care of the rest, and then we can carry their corpses back to the base, and with that a pretty nice amount of meat. Since Steak has to run over to the edge of the map each time, this last day of the month of Jugist also passes by pretty quickly, but eventually our exhausted and hungry colonist makes it back to the base for the last time. Just in that moment, someone else is sadly leaving the base. Yes, our recruitment efforts were once again in vain and we are still not able to grow our colony. As Flebe reaches the edge of the map, we do however receive a nice plus 20 bonus to our relationship with this faction, so our hospitality is appreciated after all, just not in the way I had hoped. While Steak is getting some rest, Randy Random then sends a manhunter pack at us. Seems like our hunting trip may have angered him, but luckily we're only dealing with 2 cats here, which should not give us too much trouble. As a matter of fact, I think we'll simply wait this one out inside of our base. With the dead dromedaries already hauled inside, we have everything we need for our next project, the production of even more kibble. So, step 1, slaughter the dromedaries, with 1 corpse providing us over 100 units of meat. Good thing we upgraded our storage capacity. Many hours at the butcher table later, we are down to only 1 dead dromedary outside of the base. All others have been processed into, well, not exactly delicious, but certainly nutritious meals. One of those now also serves as Steak's dinner before he can go to bed after a hard day's work, a day that increased our kibble reserves to over 1,000 units. And I'd say that's plenty to survive for a while, even with a second colonist, should someone finally be willing to join us. Now at this point I was ready to make the cut, as you can see by me zooming out for the final shot of our base, but Randy had different plans. Toxic fallout has struck the desert, and this is something we need to take care of immediately. Everything that's not underneath a roof will suffer from fallout, whether that's items, colonists or crops, so we have to roof over our entire base. Yes, even the rice and potato plants, which will of course keep them from growing without direct sunlight, but at least it preserves the current growth state, left uncovered they would all die and vanish. We also have to build a few support pillars so that the roof doesn't collapse, and we're also extending our roof to the field of cotton plants outside of the base. Having these plants die, which has already happened to a few of them, that would be pretty annoying, as they are slow-growing crops and we have been waiting for them to mature for quite some time now. If you're wondering, by the way, what became of the man-hunting cats, well, they are of course not going to stick around for long during a toxic fallout, so they have wandered off the map, allowing Steak to leave his base without having to fear feline attacks. In the afternoon, every single part of our base is then roofed over. Steak can grab one more meal and then go back to bed. A little early, but let's be honest, who can blame him? And now, we can also make the cut in today's episode. We have once again made it into a new in-game month, but of course with a year-long summer that hardly changes anything. In the next episode, we will then see how Steak spends his time, now that plant work is no longer possible and venturing outside of his base is only safe for very short stretches. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, or you can also check out and maybe pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.